Alright, what's going on, guys? One of the beautiful things about the world of Elden Ring is that we're always finding new ways to look at it or interpret the things that it presents. And this helps create a world that feels alive and provides longevity to it, creating that sense of finding something new every time you play it. And that can only be pulled off in the reality that there is something new to find. And as a testament to that, today we're revisiting a topic we covered long ago because a breakthrough has just now been made over a year and a half since the game's release. And this revolves around swords. Swords that we've been seeing since day one of playing the game, yet are only now uncovering secrets they've held that the player had absolutely no way of ever knowing. So today we're going to break that down and explore a mystery of these sword monuments that potentially held a secret questline in Elden Ring that we could possibly see make a return in DLC. But as we get into that today, I do want to remind you about our ongoing partnership with G Fuel, the leading energy drink for gamers. They have an exclusive Crimson Tears flavor for Elden Ring, as well as an Armored Core 6 themed Strider flavor, but thanks to them you now get a good discount using my link down below and by using promo code Ziostorm. All purchases directly support the channel, so be sure to check out that link. And now let's get back into it. Let's begin by talking about the sword monuments and what we know of them. Across the world of Elden Ring, you can find 14 locations where massive stone swords are stuck blade first into the ground, with a gigantic one at their center that contains glowing text written on the blade. This text can be read by the player to reveal interesting lore notes about the region and bits of history that took place in the locations that they're found. These swords can only be found above ground, in bits of the open world, and not within any of the legacy dungeons. You won't find any down below in the Eternal Cities, and also curiously none in the consecrated snowfields. Now when the game came out, many people, including myself, chalked these sword monuments up to nothing more than a Berserk reference, a play on the Hill of Swords, where Guts re-encounters Griffith after the eclipse. And with so many other Berserk references in Elden Ring, this makes perfect sense. But a better real-world example that these are based on are likely the swords in rock which can be found in Norway. This was a monument commissioned in 1983 to depict the Battle of Harfsfjord, where King Harald Fairhair united all of Norway under one crown. And given that many of these monuments in Elden Ring commemorate battles as well, that is likely the primary source of inspiration. But when it comes to the worlds that FromSoftware crafts, everything is done with intention. And things that are historical references or point to real-world tradition also have bearing in the world of the game. And so with that in mind, we have to ask some questions about the sword monuments. And I think the most important one to propose is, who made them? And the answer might not be as obvious as it seems. Now, since all the swords shared the same style, we can assume they were constructed by the same person all across the region, and whoever that was has a deep understanding of the history of the lands between. But there's one lore note that has a very interesting factor about it that could help narrow down the search substantially. This monument in Limgrave reads, Godric the Golden, humiliated having tasted defeat by the blade of Mikola, now on his knees begging for mercy. But one word in there adds a lot of confusion to this picture. The creator refers to Godric as the Golden, and the only character in the entire game to do that is Morgott. Now, am I saying Morgott is the one that made these sculptures? Not really, but I did want to bring this up because it will come into play later. The sword monuments are important, but to get the full picture here, we need to go into the files of the game, a place where the ordinary player does not have access to, but is extremely important in understanding the world of the game and the intention of the developers. And in those files, we can find tons of cut icons of items, weapons, and armor that didn't make it into the final release of the game. Now, we've looked into these for a while, and among them was a series of icons that really caught our attention. These three swords. These swords have no name, no associated tags, and no connections within the files, just the icons and no context whatsoever. And so this left us stumped for a while, trying to theorize possibilities about what these swords could be and how they would have fit into the world of Elden Ring, and only recently we've made a breakthrough. Fellow lore YouTuber Pino Pinissimo shot me a message over on Twitter saying that he had finally found the match for the sword, specifically the first of the three, and that it had been hiding under our noses all along. That's because this cut sword is the one found in the sword monuments. Right off the bat, we can notice that the hilts are the same, even down to the chipping on the end of the handle, and the way the decoration on the sheath appears to be eroded, although there are some notable differences, at least when it comes to the cracks. The icon of the sword does not have the writing on it, obviously, but does have very large cracks in the same spot where the writing is on the monument. But to really drive home that these are the same sword, if you can manage to clip below the ground, we can see that the end of the sheath is exactly the same, with the relief being identical although a little bit less weathered on the icon. But what does this actually mean? What is the the significance of the icon being in the files if it's obvious that these swords have their own models? Well, this icon can be found in the weapons section, which means that these sword grave monuments would have been an actual sword that the player could wield. Now, judging by the size of the handle, I think it's safe to say it would be a straight sword, but icons are not always representative of the full size of the weapon, so we really don't have any way of knowing. Now, this is about as far as the factual information about this weapon goes, but the rabbit hole is only just beginning. As I mentioned earlier, the monument sword is only one in a set of 3, found in a line of 2 other icons that go along with it, but we're only assuming they go together. They have no tags or context whatsoever, but there are some very obvious visual signs, notably that they all 3 share the exact same hilt, and are the same length, which would suggest that these are the same sword, just in different versions. We can see that the monument sword appears to still be sheathed. The second sword in the series is unsheathed, with lots of royal ornamental designs. The third is also unsheathed, but appears twisted almost as if it was melted. So let's break down these other 2, starting with the most ornamental of the group. This one is very odd to me, because when I tried to match it to other weapons in the game, I couldn't find any that really screamed similarity. The blade on this sword is white, almost like it's made of marble, and there are no other weapons in the game with blades that look like that. However, if we go to the Haligtree, we can find lots of statues and construction that have a similar make. The sword shares a lot of similar motifs with the architecture in the Haligtree, but that is just my personal opinion, and we can't say that this is definitely what it's closest to. But Elden Ring uses so much color coordination, and white and gold is most certainly closely associated with the Haligtree. Leyndell also has this similar color coordination, but instead of that ivory white that the sword has, things in Leyndell are commonly built with stone or made from wood to represent the Erdtree, which is why I do kind of hesitate to make this connection as much as the Haligtree. The only thing we can really say for certain here is that white and gold are the colors of royalty, but we find ourselves on the opposite end of the spectrum when analyzing the third of these swords. This one is crude and malformed, twisted as though it was melted by fire. And immediately when looking at this sword, my mind goes to the Flame of Frenzy, because things associated with frenzy tend to be melted and colored in a similar way. If we compare it to Vike's War Spear, it is a bit similar in the same melted style, but the color just isn't the same. However, the fingerprint armor set is almost identical, and this connection makes me think the Flame of Frenzy is the most likely candidate for what this sword is associated with. It is also worth noting that the Giant's Flame is also a flame characterized by swirls, but the motif of the fell god is 8 swirls, never just 1 or 2 like we see on the sword. The coloration of the sword also can resemble Morgoth's Blood Flame sword, but this one is missing any of the swirls or the melted style to it. But considering we already have one connection to Morgoth, it is worth at least considering that that may have been a possible reference. So the fact that the sword has 3 stages to it almost certainly implies that there was a quest involved to take the sword through each of the stages, likely obtaining the monument sword from visiting some of the monuments, then a quest step to unsheath it, and then perhaps a final step where you could take it to the 3 fingers and melt it down into that 3rd stage. But as it stands right now, visual evidence is all we have to go off for that, so this is purely speculation. But if we want to take this speculation a step further, then we can look to the Church of Vows, and another secret we covered long ago on this channel. Here we can find Miriel, who has some very interesting cut dialogue that references a quest for a sword. So take a listen to this.
Are you taking the sword with you? Oh, fear not. I don't wish to chide you. Clearly you are no conniving thief. The sword is telling us something, no doubt. Rather than collect dust in the shadows underground, it yearns to be wielded by your rightful hand. Ah, now I recall. As the priest of the Church of Vows, I undo the sword's seal and bequeath it unto you. May you hold it high and proud.
Could this sword that Miriel's referring to be the monument sword? Let's think about it for a minute. Miriel is a character that is very knowledgeable about the history of the Lands Between, and a sword that represents the various monuments commemorating that history may very well be in his possession. He also mentions in that dialogue a step in which he undoes the sword's seal, and as we saw in our monument sword, somehow it has to be unsheathed. And he does mention that up to that point the sword has been collecting dust underground. And if we take a look at the weathered state of of the Monument Sword, then I can't lie, that sounds pretty convincing for this one. But we do need to keep in mind that since Muriel's sword quest was cut, it could potentially be referencing any weapon in the game, whether that weapon was cut or not. And since Muriel is so closely associated with Radagon and Renala, I think one of Radagon's swords is a much better fit. That being said, I can't deny the connection with Muriel's cut sword quest and the cut quest for the Monument Sword, that there may very well have been some overlap, if not that sword being the exact one he was referring to. But what do you make of these cut swords? Do you believe they were tied to Muriel's quest, and do you believe they were connected at all? I just wanted to come on here today and highlight what we now know about those, because these swords have been one of the most fascinating things to me in all of the cut content, and I'm just glad we now have another clue in figuring out exactly what they were meant to be. But anyways though guys, that is going to pretty much do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like on it, subscribe if you're new around here, go check out my G Fuel link down in the description below in order to support the channel, and with all that, I will catch you in the next one.